Thanks for joining us. My name is Brian Elaine. I'm here today with Caroline Beidler. Caroline is a grateful woman in recovery, author and founder of Bright Story Shine, a storytelling platform that celebrates stories of recovery and resilience. She's also the director of Creative Consultation Services, LLC, a business focused on creating sustainable addiction recovery support services at the local, state, and federal level. She's the past director of Wisconsin Voices for Recovery, along with a past founder and director of ED2 Recovery, a nationally recognized program that brings recovery coaching into the emergency department setting. Through her consulting work, speaking engagements, and writing, Caroline has worked with legislators, nonprofits, universities, federal agencies, and others to create innovative models that empower communities and people in recovery. Caroline was the former chair of the Prevention Committee for the Wisconsin State Council on Alcohol and Other Drug Abuse by governor's appointment and has participated in many state and national coalitions and committees. She founded two programs for college-age youth in recovery. One is Live Free, Student Wellness and Recovery, which is now known as Badger Recovery, and Connect House Sober Living Foundation. In 2015, she won the Texas Research Society on Alcoholism, John T. and Patricia A. O'Neill Addiction Science Education Award for her research on stigma and social support for recently deployed veterans. Her writing is featured on the Grit and Grace Project, The Rooms, The Fix, the Addiction Technology Transfer Center, and many other websites. Her new book that we're going to talk about today is Downstairs Church, Finding Home in the Grit and Addiction and Trauma Recovery, which releases today. Caroline and her family live in Tennessee, where she enjoys writing, hiking in the mountains, and chasing around her 3-year-old twins. That's got to be fun. You can learn more at carolinebeidler.com. That's CarolineBeidler. So Caroline, it's so great to have you back with us, and congratulations on all these amazing things that you've done.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I so appreciate that. And I always have this experience when I'm hearing my bio read that it's kind of like, wow, she sounds so busy and it's a little bit tiring. I need a cup of coffee just listening to that. Um, but I think we can both relate to just, when we have energy and passion around an area that we love and that we feel called to work in, we just have this ability to step up and build, and to create. And I just love being able to be a co-creator, with God, on this planet and, for this brief time that I'm here. I do want to add, there's a slight change. So with the bio, my twins are now 4 years old.
Oh,
So
okay.
yes, so they're moving even more quickly than
Yes.
the last time we talked.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, I mean, you are so entrepreneurial. You've launched so many different things, and I love, watching that, and seeing all that you've accomplished, and just wonderful to observe.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
So, out of all those things, or besides all those things I talked about, what else would you like people to know about
Well, that's a great question. I feel like sometimes, especially, on this author journey and, when a book's coming out, we kind of focus on what we've done, but and the work that we're doing, I like to share with people that, I'm generally a really grateful person. And I have things in my life today, blessings like my beautiful twins and my husband, who I want to add as a scientist. So we're kind of like two sides of, and I'm like the creative. I don't know. It's a very interesting, sometimes maddening partnership, but it works for us. Um, I have so many things that I'm so grateful for today. And so I think, and also being a woman in addiction recovery, mental health and trauma recovery, I think those things really have, that's who I am. And I've centered my life around those things. I think, and I feel like people who are probably watching or listening to this have that thing or those things that they've been through that have been hard and that have been challenging and that have maybe broken you. And for me, being able to say, okay, this is what happened to me, but now I can live in a place of gratitude. I just like to share that's really, I feel like I've done all these things, but mainly I'm a person today, just like everyone else, living and having lived through some hard things. But now I can say, I've been redeemed from those things. and I can be grateful and look at my twins and my husband and be like, wow, God is good. God is very, very good.
I mean, it's just so wonderful to watch, you make lemonade out of lemons and to, kind of turn your life into what it is today because you've not only accomplished so much, but you've helped so many people. Having gone through what you went through, I think, gives you the degree of empathy and understanding for lots of other people that they need.
Mm. Yeah. And, I'm so grateful for that God has really, brought me through a lot of that and comforted me so I can, as scripture says, be there for those folks who need comfort in the same way that I've been comforted. And I think the other thing, and I've been reflecting on this a lot with my book, being launched today, and, it's the celebratory thing. And wow, I hope so many people get the book and are impacted and moved by it. And all of those things are true. And at the same time, it's really just about that one person. It's about that one person that I can connect with and speak to, and hopefully that one person who feels moved by my book and moved by the words that I share. I think as an author, for me, it's really important to stay grounded in that because there's a lot in the world that wants me to get distracted by the hype and the platform and, creating reels and doing all this like crazy stuff that I don't feel comfortable doing. But really it's ultimately about speaking to that one person, just like we're called to just be there for that one person, whether that's listening or sharing our story to hopefully impact someone else's.
Well, good for you. I mean, I think it's a wonderful attitude to take for this work. So before we get into the new book, can you tell us a little bit about the previous things that you've written?
Sure, absolutely. So, most of my writing has been with, you mentioned a couple of the different websites and things. I get connected with a amazing group of women from the Grit and Grace Project. So you can check them out online, the Grit and Grace Project. It was started by Darlene Brock, who's a former producer in the Christian music industry. Darlene and her husband launched this really initiative to share women's stories, to talk about the real and kind of, gritty experiences that we have, whether that's in motherhood or with relationships, whatever that thing is. And so, a couple of years ago, I've always been a writer, but a couple of years ago, I just had this, when you feel that like nudge that you can't not listen to, it's like it just kept nagging at me, and it just was like relentless. And so anyways, I just happened upon the website and I had written this article and I was like, maybe I should just send it along and see what happens. I don't know, and I had done a lot of writing just personally. And so anyways, they reached back out to me. Their editor called me and said, would you be a team writer? And I'm like, I just submitted one like silly article I had written on my phone, with my thumb. When I was holding a baby, and from there, what happened was amazing. And just like in my recovery journey, what I discovered was that writing and being an author isn't something that can happen in isolation, that it's really a community effort. And so what happened a couple of years ago when I connected with the Grit and Grace Project was all of a sudden I had all of these other women and sisters who were not only writers, but writers who wanted to grow in their craft and grow together and also help other women. And it was like the perfect place for me to land. So a lot of my work, a lot of my articles are found there. And actually a couple of the articles can be found in my new book, Downstairs Church. So, and I've done articles and op-eds and different things like that, but this is primarily my, my first launch into the world with a book, but I also do have an online ebook called Guide to Shine, 10 Practical Ways to Make Your Recovery Shine. And I really try to offer women in recovery and other folks specific practical tools, not kind of like this pie in the sky, ways to recover and this and that, but practical ways, how in the real world, in the day-to-day, can we thrive and kind of refresh our recovery journeys. And so that's available to anyone on my website, carolinebeidler.com, because I like giving things away and I like connecting with people. And so I love to offer that as a free gift for folks who want to connect.
Excellent. Excellent. So the new book, let's talk about that. Downstairs Church, Finding Hope in the Grit of Addiction and Trauma Recovery. So what, amongst all the different things that you're doing, what motivated you to do a book?
Yeah. So, Downstairs Church, interestingly, I told a friend of mine recently, there's one sentence in this book that is from the original book I started when I was 19 years old. So over 2 decades ago. And at 19, I started my addiction recovery journey in high school. And so I felt really called. Again, I had been writing, even as, in elementary school, in my little journals and things, I felt really called to share my story. And so I, brought this to my creative writing professor at the time, as in undergrad. And, he read it and nodded and said, you have a gift and I think you're onto something. Why don't you put your pen down for about 20 years and go live some life? Yep, go live some life. 20 years, go live some life and come back.
Oh my.
And, at the time, I didn't know how oddly prophetic that would be because it was almost literally 20 years later, but I lived life. I found recovery. I went back to graduate school. I did all of these different projects and started nonprofits and did all of these things. And it was during COVID, I felt God speak very clearly to me. Now is the time.
Wow.
And so I pulled that dusty manuscript. I still had it, this is long, but these were floppy disk days, I pulled this manuscript out and looked at it and basically just, threw the whole thing away except for this one sentence and started again. And from there, just doors flew open for me. And so I really knew that now was the time. And so I've really put everything that I have into this book and into getting this message out because I believe in it so very much.
Well, good for you. Who would you say the book is most intended for?
Love that question. And I've had a lot of folks help me tease that out because I've learned that that's one of the most important things is identifying who you're writing for. And I think early on, and as a 19-year-old and even more recently, I hate to admit, I was writing this for myself. I was writing it as it was a very therapeutic, it was a very cathartic. I was writing it for myself, but when I could flip that and identify, okay, my ultimate goal is to help people. And how can I do that? Who can I write this book for and to? And really, God put on my heart to write this book for the woman who is seeking transformation, who is seeking healing. And so ultimately, my main audience is for that woman. So it might be someone struggling with addiction recovery, mental health recovery, trauma recovery. And with, I'm sure you've seen in the news, the statistics on addiction right now, especially the last couple of years, have skyrocketed. Overdose rates are tragically, and horrifically through the roof. We have women, especially instances of alcohol use has increased. There's so much in our world, and I get it, that it's legitimate. We want to escape from, right? And so I think the world is just hurting around these issues right now so much. So that woman, I am speaking to her, and I'm really hoping as kind of a secondary group of folks that this book will be and act as an advocacy tool in that it will bring community awareness to people, especially people in the pews, in churches, in faith communities, bring awareness to the issues around addiction, especially for women and some of those intersecting things like trauma and mental health challenges that I talk about in the book.
Wow. Very cool. I'm glad you thought it through that well. You know what I mean? And kind of evolved your own perspective of that question.
Well, I'd like to say that was all from me, but it wasn't. I had so much support, like I said, along the way. I reached out to, and I recommend this to anyone who's out there starting their own, author and writing journey. But those folks who have websites, Heather Kopp wrote Sober Mercies. Her email, thank God, was on her website. And I sent her an email and I told her who I was. And I said, hey, I'd love to connect. She responded. Philip Yancey, I reached out to. And I reached out to everyone I could think of and just was like, here's what I want to do. Here's where my heart is. And I received some of the best feedback because I just kind of took a leap of faith, and reached out. So, but yeah, I had some incredible guidance, and my agent, Tom Dean from A Drop of Ink, he's been phenomenal too in helping me craft, the message to an audience.
Wonderful. So let's talk about the publishing process since you mentioned Tom. How did you find an agent? How did you and the agent find a publishing house? How did all that play out for you?
Well, it was interesting how that happens. And, back again, when I was 19, I went through that whole process of trying to find an agent, and I actually found one, big fancy New York agent. And then as soon as I was about ready to sign the contract, they sent me a letter saying they went bankrupt. I was like, oh, great. So all these doors closed, and I can relate so much to the folks who are out there getting rejection after rejection after rejection, because I went through that for years. And even with this book, finding Tom and connecting with Tom was through, a friend, who knew someone who knew someone. And it was that relationship and those connections in that way. I can't explain it other than a God thing, but, he's been incredible. And, I went through a lot of the rejection phase through trying to find a publisher, because I had a lot of the bigger Christian publishing houses saying, love it, you're writing. If we could make this decision based on writing alone, we would sign you, all of this. But I kept getting no's, and it was all centered around the platform component.
Wow.
Which I get. I mean, I completely get that. And so and now I see that as a blessing, because what that afforded me the opportunity to do was go back, this is 3 years ago now, and say, okay, what do I need to build, and how do I need to position myself so that, maybe I will never hit the social media numbers that they're looking for or have 100,000 followers. But if I can build a relationship with just that one reader, a real authentic relationship, and provide, quality content and just that connection piece, and maybe a platform will develop, who knows? But if I can go back and do that, then getting those no's, it was worth it, because it helped me take a look at what I needed to do. And so I ended up deciding, though, to go a little bit non-traditional and the hybrid publishing route for this book, partially because of that, but I wanted to try something new. And I felt that working with someone who saw possibility when maybe the numbers weren't there yet, but who really believed in my message and that possibility, and had that connection with forward thinking, like, maybe the numbers aren't there right now, but there's something here. And so I like to connect with those people. So anyways, I went with Morgan James Publishing, and I highly recommend. They've been great working with, I had worked with a great editor and all of those pieces. And so I wouldn't change anything now, again, because I've learned so much in the process. And obviously in the future, I'm hoping to work with, a traditional publishing house, but that's what that's the route I've taken.
Well, good for you. Right now. Thanks for sharing that with us. I mean, I'm always so fascinated about how many different avenues are out there that, everyone I talk to has got a different story, a different journey, a different saga of what they went through,
Right.
before making it happen.
Right. Yeah.
I was going to say, so many authors that I work with are challenged with determining what sensitive things to divulge and how to do that, particularly when it involves other people's experiences. How have you dealt with that?
That's a great question, especially because what I talk about in the book, addiction and trauma and all of these challenges, those topics are just so sensitive and in nature, and we have to be careful, and not just with other people's stories, but with our own story. I've had that experience where I write so much about a personal experience and then put it out there, and it almost feels like triggering, because all of a sudden I put this out there, but I can't really control now what happens with that. I can't really say, how someone's going to take that or use that information, so it can be a really challenging experience. And I think, again, utilizing the counsel, and advice of other folks who have been in in the field longer has been really helpful. I worked with my editor at the Grit and Grace Project, Ashley, and she walked me through how to talk about an experience of sexual violence in a way that would help the reader and also not harm the reader if they had been in an experience similar to that. And so it is very challenging. I have folks that I've asked permission to share little pieces of their story. For example, I start the book talking about, I don't want to give too much away, but I start the book talking about an experience I had in a recovery meeting, and I was in my early 20s, and a woman named Tanya was in the recovery meeting. And so, just imagine this open circle of chairs, we're all sitting in this space. And Tanya told her story about what was going to be happening to her. And she was going to be facing prison time, and just finds out she was pregnant and was going to be having the baby while in prison. And I remember hearing her talk about that. And it came to me that I need to have this in the book. Obviously, I need to talk to her about it. And so we reached out, and we ended up having an amazing conversation. She agreed. She was like, yes, please. I would be happy to be in this story. I interviewed her. And so I was able to take quotes from more recent time. And so she was a part of that process. And so I think when we talk about, including different people's stories and experiences, making sure that they are a part of the process. There is a measure of needing to let go of, so say and I don't include a lot about my family history, for example, but, when authors do that, recognizing that sometimes we need to share those parts of our stories to speak to, that person needing to hear it, or even just for our own hearts. And there's going to be, I don't want to say consequences because that sounds too harsh, but there's weight in that. And we have to be okay with and able to carry that weight and that responsibility. And, for some of us, we're ready to do that. And for some of us, it's either not quite time or not appropriate to.
Mm-hmm. It's a tough thing, tough decision.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to read one of the things that Frederick Buechner wrote about Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, "You can't help thinking that something like this is what the church is meant to be, and maybe once was, before it got to be big business." I just love that by him. Do you kind of feel that way too?
100%. And I think, you will read currents of that sentiment throughout this book. And I think, for faith communities, when I mentioned wanting it to be this book to be an advocacy tool or a call to action, I think there's something beautiful that happens in the recovery community, in those downstairs spaces of recovery, that all communities, including churches, can learn from. That radical honesty and vulnerability. And, I come back to the verse in James that talks about, when we confess our sins to one another, we can be healed. Right. And so when we bring light onto something, we can be healed. And I feel like for me, that is recovery. It is coming up into the light with all of our mess and all of our, character defects, all of our truth. It's not sitting in a pew and singing a song and listening to something. It's just showing up and being totally real and totally vulnerable. And I think the church can learn so much from that. I mentioned Philip Yancey, and he's probably my favorite author of all time. And I love his book so much. But, in What's So Amazing About Grace, he talks about that concept of the recovery meeting and that the AA meeting specifically, and how, when he went downstairs into those spaces, it was like he connected more with God and with spirituality than when going upstairs. And there was just such this difference. And actually the book title, Downstairs Church, I took from an interview I did with him, and I have the little quote on the back, and he okayed it being on there, and I was just fangirl, like jumping up and down, thanking him and his assistant. But he said, "From the downstairs church, I learned radical honesty and radical dependence. We can't make it on our own." And to me, that is the spiritual journey right there. That realization and that acceptance and proclamation that we can't do it on our own. We need God, and showing up real. And I love that about recovery. And, I talk about it in the book. I found God and my path to following Jesus, not in a church. It was in a church basement, and that's what I want to share in the book is about that journey too.
Wow. So in the book's description, it says that it provides a practical list of ways that faith communities can become more trauma-informed spaces for those who may be seeking love and acceptance inside church buildings. So what are some of the practical ways that you talk about?
Yeah, so I have my book here. So this is in chapter Are We There Yet? I'm a fan of practical tools. I talked about my ebook, Guide to Shine, that you can find on my website. I love the list, and I kind of make a joke in the book for all my blogger friends and everyone who we all love our lists. We love our scrolling and our quick consumption of information. So for those who love lists as much as I do, I have a couple things. One of them, for example, being creating opportunities for safety. And so I know we all hear this term, or maybe you're familiar with the term safe space, and I think for folks like me, no space is safe if someone just says it's safe. It's not that, you can put a sticker on your church window or declare something safe. Safety needs to be fostered and trust needs to be built. And so I think, especially for faith communities wanting to connect with people in addiction recovery and people like me who've struggled over the years to connect with a faith community, thinking through ways to foster a sense of safety. And that could be something as simple as, or not simple, but, having issue-specific ministries that are, specifically for women, for example, or making sure that when you have greeters at the door on Sunday, you have an option for people who might not feel safe being greeted by a gentleman, or maybe a place where folks can sit where you have more space. I remember for me, it used to be terrifying. I would have literal panic attacks in church in my 20s because I would have to sit next to someone I didn't know. And, we don't think about that. We don't think about that might be the reason why that person walking past the church on a Sunday morning isn't coming inside, because they don't feel like they can sit down and be safe. And so hopefully things like creating opportunities for safety. I would love to go through a couple other ones, but you could get the book too and check it out. But I like to provide practical things that not just churches, but really all communities can think about and focus on when, thinking about how they can show up and support people struggling with addiction issues.
So I'd like to read one of the other endorsements for the book. This one's from our friend Kathy Izzard. Caroline Beidler has written an inspirational book that is everything recovery meetings are: raw, beautiful, and real. She creates a relationship with her readers that is everything she wishes all life could be: honest, loving, and connected. Downstairs Church is a must read for anyone in recovery and those who love them, as well as people of faith seeking to create true caring communities. So you already talked about this a little bit, but can you speak about creating a relationship with your reader?
Yeah, so, I've been told that my writing style feels very much like you're just sitting down with someone and having coffee. And so I try to stay true to that voice. The other piece of creating a relationship, and I think, like I mentioned, I've learned this over the past couple of years of really developing, I don't even like to use the word platform because it is relationships, but learning more about who those folks are out there who I'm speaking to. And one of my favorite things to get is to open my email and see messages from folks, on my email list saying, I love to throw out questions like, hey, what are you doing in your community? What resource are you building? What do you care about? And I love people responding and telling me like, oh, hey, I just opened a women's recovery home, which, oh, I love that. Or, I'm looking at, creating a nonprofit to support parents, or, here's a podcast I love, just really a back and forth conversation. Cause I feel like, we might have this tendency to feel like we have to just keep providing all, it's all about us giving all this content. And we, if you're like me, scroll social media, it's like, oh no, here's another blonde woman talking about Jesus, like, do we really need that, again? But it's about like a back and forth and a reciprocal relationship. So I think focusing on those pieces of how do you really connect and use things like email and social media, events, different things to really connect and learn more about what people care about, and what they need and what they want to hear about. And one of the events that I started, we had just had our second annual event on International Women's Day. So I created a global women's recovery event called Amplifying Women's Voices in Recovery Advocacy. And so this year I partnered with the She Recovers Foundation. It was on March 8th. So hopefully an annual event. But we brought together about 20 women across the globe, several different languages, everyone sharing about their own story of recovery. And it was incredible. It was beautiful. It wasn't just me coming up there and being like, oh, this is my story. And, isn't it great? And blah, blah, blah. And that's not what it's about. It's about connecting and sharing and learning from all of our stories. And one of the most important, I think, and impactful books I read early on when I started this journey, and it sounds kind of like markety, but anyways, Donald Miller's Story Brand.
Yeah.
I learned so much from that book, and it's not like the whole branding thing, but the relationship thing and how important the reader is. Again, it's not my story. This is about speaking to the reader's story, and how I can impact someone else and bringing it back to the faith journey or, dismantling and, our divides. It's like, how can we connect and unify and bring together around a common interest or a common thing we want to help support someone with, like addiction?
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I think people have a lot that they can learn from your example on this. So I encourage people to read the book and then, see what Caroline's done on this. So can you talk about your consulting services that you provide and who are those for?
Yeah. So maybe next time I should get you an updated bio. So I'm doing some consulting, but so my latest project, I'm actually the outreach and membership coordinator for an association called the Association for Recovery in Higher Education. And so I've been hired on to help them build up their association. And so they work with primarily universities, institutions of higher education, trade schools, and community colleges in the US, Canada, and the United Kingdom to build up recovery support for college students. And so I absolutely love it. It is just so being able to be a part of building something that helps college students and young people in recovery, because that's when I found and started my own healing journey. And so to be able to be a part of that has been incredible. And it, again, it feels like something that I can help build and create. And I love that, while also doing something that is about recovery, which is beautiful. In the past, I've done grant writing for different organizations and building up nonprofits. And I love strategizing with folks about, whether something's broken or doesn't exist yet, but how to build that up to provide the most benefit for folks who, are going to be accessing whatever organization or support service this is. So another one of my favorite projects I did was for a group in Wisconsin called Wiz Hope, and it was building up a recovery-friendly workplace initiative. So it was a little outside my comfort zone, but I learned so much about employee benefits and just all of this stuff I never thought I would, give a hoot about. But it was really neat to be able to bring some of my skills to help build this program. And, it's thriving today in Wisconsin. So it's really neat to see. But yeah, if you don't know, Association of Recovery in Higher Education, it's a great organization.
Cool. So any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
Final thoughts. Well, I'd like to say to that person who might be struggling today with addiction, that person whose family member, loved one, neighbor, church member is struggling, there is help. There is help. And what's beautiful about being a storyteller, and being an author is that there's hope in the stories that we have. And, I'm just one of a drop in a bucket, a grain of sand on the seashore of folks who have lived through addiction and made it out to the other side. And, I just want to encourage the folks listening who might be connecting with that struggle, whether it's yours personally or someone you love, but there is hope and there's a way out. And so whether it's my story that will get you there or give you a glimpse of that hope, or if it's someone else's, I encourage you to find and seek out that place where you can hear those stories of recovery and redemption. Because that's what I did. And I found transformation and freedom on the other side of that. So,
Mhm.
so yeah.
Good for you. Good for you. So I know this is like the launch day for your new book, but I have to ask you if you've got any future books in mind out there that you could talk about.
Woo! Oh, do I? I have so many ideas, Brian.
Good.
I'm like you. I'm like you. We just had a long road trip to back home, and so I had a lot of time in the car. But no, I have another book. It is very near to having the proposal sent out. So I'm just kind
Excellent.
of waiting to see how things go with this launch. I'm really hoping it goes well. I would like to explore. There's a couple editors at some traditional houses that I would love to work with, and so we'll see how it goes. I'm not going to say too much about it yet, though.
No, that's
But
fine. That's fine. I understand.
I'm very excited. And then of course I have a whole list. So we'll see what this next chapter of my life brings. But I certainly hope that I have the opportunity to keep connecting with my
Good.
readers.
That's excellent. I really hope that goes well. I really feel that it will. So Caroline, thanks again, for joining us. And again, the title of her new book is Downstairs Church, Finding Hope in the Grit of Addiction and Trauma Recovery. And you can learn more at Caroline's website, carolinebeidler.com. Caroline, thanks so much and congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you again today.
Same here.